Hello everyone, my name is Nagy. Today we'll start the first lecture of the autonomic nervous system. In this lecture, we'll discuss the structural and functional organization of the autonomic nervous system. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy our presentation. The autonomic nervous system is that part of the nervous system that controls involuntary actions. That is, the smooth and the cardiac muscles, the exocrine and endocrine glands. We start with the anatomical division of the nervous system. Anatomically, the nervous system is divided into two parts: the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. Second, the peripheral nervous system, that's the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. The cranial nerves are 12 pairs. Some are sensory, some are motor, and the rest are mixed nerves. The spinal nerves are 31 pairs, 8 cervical and 12 thoracic. Count 20. 5 lumbar and 5 sacral. Count 10. And 1 coccygeal. This makes the total of 31 nerves. So, for easily memorizing, 5 cervical and 12 thoracics, count 20. 5 lumbar and 5 sacral, count 10, and 1 coccygeal. This makes the total of 31. In contrast to the cranial nerves, all the spinal nerves are mixed nerves. That is, each spinal nerve contains sensory. Each spinal nerve contains sensory or afferent nerve fibers in their posterior or dorsal root, and motor, we try to make it more clear, and motor or efferent fibers in their anterior or ventral root. An MSQ fact. So each spinal nerve is attached to the spinal cord by 2 roots. The posterior root, also called dorsal or sensory root, and the anterior root, also called ventral or motor root. Note, each part of the spinal cord to which a pair of spinal nerves are attached is called spinal segment. Accordingly, we have 31 spinal segments corresponding to the 31 pairs of spinal nerves. But it's important to know that there is no actual structural segmentation of the spinal cord. Under the microscope, in each spinal segment we can see the followings: central canal at its center, surrounded by edge-shaped gray matter, which is surrounded by the white matter. Nerve cells, also called neurons, which are also called neurons, are located only in the gray matter. MSQ fact. The nerve cells, neurons, are located in the gray matter only. In each side or half, we can notice that the gray matter is formed of 2 horns in some of the segments or 3 horns in other segments. These horns are the posterior or dorsal horn, the anterior or ventral horn. But only in the thoracolumbar or sympathetic division we have as well a 3rd horn. That's the lateral horn. My explanation is the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system has a much wider distribution than the parasympathetic division. So more cells are needed by the sympathetic nervous system. Accordingly, the gray matter, which contains the cells, has to expand in these segments, which give rise to the sympathetic nerves, that is, in the thoracolumbar region only. What a perfect, smart design. I want you to know that there are 5 main structures in the body which have only sympathetic supply with no parasympathetic supply. These structures are the skin and skeletal muscles, and the ventricle of the heart, spleen, and adrenal medulla. Important MSQ facts. The main structures which have only sympathetic supply. I always try to say it in 2 groups: skin and skeletal muscles, and 3 inside the body: the ventricle of the heart, spleen, and the adrenal medulla. These 5 structures are involved in emergency situations. For example, fight or flight, which are the functions of the sympathetic nervous system. This is why they have sympathetic and they do not have parasympathetic supply. Again, what a perfect, smart design. Functionally, the nervous system is divided into Functionally, the nervous system is divided into 2 divisions. The sensory division, which receives sensory signals via afferent nerve fibers, and the motor division, which sends motor signals via efferent nerve fibers. The motor division of the nervous system is further subdivided into 2 parts. The somatic nervous system, which controls voluntary actions, that's skeletal muscles, which move the body, that is the soma. The body is called soma, and hence this system is called the somatic nervous system, as it moves the soma of the body. The second part of the motor nervous system is the autonomic nervous system, which controls the involuntary actions performed by smooth and cardiac muscles, exocrine and endocrine glands. That is automatic actions, and hence it's called the autonomic nervous system. So we have sensory division and motor division. This motor division is further subdivided into somatic nervous system, controlling skeletal muscles, voluntary actions, and autonomic nervous system controls involuntary actions. This is why it's called autonomic nervous system. That's muscles, smooth and cardiac, and glands, exocrine and endocrine glands. Now we come to the anatomical organization of somatic outflow. The anatomic organization of somatic outflow. First point, the somatic nerve fibers start at the anterior horn cell in the spinal cord, and, which is not shown in the diagram, the motor cranial nuclei in the brain. Multiple choice fact. In the spinal cord, the somatic nerve fibers start at the anterior horn cells. Second point, in the spinal cord, all the spinal nerves contain somatic efferent fibers. These somatic efferent fibers pass via the anterior or ventral root of the spinal nerve. This is the second fact, multiple choice fact. Third point, the somatic efferents which supply the ordinary contractile skeletal muscle fibers are A-alpha, that is thick myelinated nerve fibers, which have the fastest velocity with an average conducting velocity 100 meters per second. Fourth point, the somatic efferents go directly to skeletal muscles with no ganglion. That is, the somatic nervous system is one efferent neuron system. Important MSQ fact. That is, the action of the somatic efferent neurons, the actions of the somatic efferent neurons continue all the way, uninterrupted from the central nervous system to skeletal muscles without ganglia. The fifth fact, the somatic efferent nerve fibers secrete one type of chemical transmitter, that's acetylcholine. The last fact, the somatic efferents supply only one type of effector organs, that's skeletal muscles. For easy memorizing, I always use what I call the luck number. So my luck number of facts related to the somatic nervous system is number 1. Let's note, it's a very easy and nice way to remember. The somatic nervous system is one efferent neuron system. Very important MCQ fact. One efferent neuron system. One efferent neuron system. There are no ganglia in between. The second fact. The somatic efferent fibers supplying the ordinary contractile skeletal muscle fibers are one type of nerve fibers, the A-alpha thick myelinated nerve fibers. Third fact, the somatic efferent fibers secrete one type of chemical transmitter, that's acetylcholine. And the fourth and last fact, the somatic efferent fibers supplies one type of effector organs, that's skeletal muscles. So the luck number for somatic nervous system is one efferent neuron system, one type of nerve fibers, one chemical transmitter, and one effector organ, that's skeletal muscle. Now we come to the anatomic organization of the autonomic outflow. In the spinal cord, the first fact, the sympathetic efferent fibers start at the lateral horn cells, not the anterior horn cells, of all the thoracic and upper 3 or 4 lumbar. This is why the sympathetic nervous system is sometimes called the thoracolumbar division of autonomic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system reacts in sympathy, for example, by increasing the heart rate and sweating, and hence its name sympathetic, because it reacts in sympathy. So we call it the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic efferent fibers start at 2 sites. First, at motor nuclei of 4 cranial nerves. Motor nuclei of 4 cranial nerves. Motor nuclei of 4 cranial nerves. Number 3, 7, 9, and 10. The motor nuclei of cranial nerves number 3, 7, 9, and 10. For easy memorizing, I have a very easy method. Remember the year of October War between the Arabs and the Israelis. It was year 1973. But to remember the number of cranial nerves containing the parasympathetic efferent nerve fibers, read the numbers from the right side. 3, 7, 9, don't say 1. After 9 we say 10. 3, 7, 9, 10. 3, 7, 9, 10. So remember, the October War between the Arabs and the Israeli, it was 1973. This will remind you with the cranial nerves containing parasympathetic efferent fibers. The second place where the parasympathetic nerve fibers arise is the gray matter of the second, third, and fourth sacral segments. I will correct this. Second, third, and fourth. That's the middle 3 sacral segments. The gray matter of the second, third, and fourth sacral segments, in between the anterior and posterior horns, as there are no collateral horns in the parasympathetic segments, as in case of sympathetic nervous system. This is why the parasympathetic nervous system are sometimes called the craniosacral division of autonomic nervous system. In case of spinal cord, notice, in case of spinal cord, the autonomic nerve fibers, travel together with the somatic nerve fibers in the anterior or ventral roots. An important MSQ fact. The autonomic nerve fibers and the somatic nerve fibers both of them pass in the anterior or ventral roots of the spinal cord. Note, very important notes. All spinal nerves contain somatic nerve fibers. All spinal nerves contain somatic nerve fibers. But only some of the spinal nerves contain as well autonomic nerve fibers. That is, the autonomic nervous system has a limited origin. Only in the thoracolumbar regions in case of the sympathetic nervous system, and the craniosacral regions in case of parasympathetic nervous system. Note, the somatic efferent fibers have a wider origin, as it's present in all the motor cranial nerves and all the spinal nerves. Meanwhile, these fibers supply only one type of effector organs in skeletal muscles. My explanation is the huge number of somatic nerve fibers allows each somatic nerve fiber to control only a few skeletal muscle fibers to execute fine, discrete movements, as in case of muscles of articulation used in speech and the hand muscles which perform fine movements. So the sympathetic nervous system has wide origins. All motor cranial nuclei, all spinal nerves contain somatic nerve fibers. And all these fibers supplies only the skeletal muscle. Why this? So that every somatic nerve fiber supplies only very few muscle fibers to perform fine, discrete movements, like for the muscles of articulation in speech and the fine movements of hand muscles. Notes: the autonomic nervous system is a two efferent neuron system. That is, we have two efferents. The first efferent is the preganglionic neuron, which starts from the central nervous system to autonomic ganglia. Its axon is thin myelinated group B fibers with conduction velocity 10 meters per second. The preganglionic nerve fibers are usually long, especially in case of the parasympathetic nervous system, where its ganglia are mostly terminal. The second efferent is the postganglionic neuron, which starts from the autonomic ganglia to the effector organ. Its axon is unmyelinated group C fibers with conduction velocity just 1 meter per second. The postganglionic nerve fibers are usually short. Note, the autonomic signals, especially for the parasympathetic nervous system, are conducted most of the distance to the organ at a high velocity, 10 meters per second. This is because the preganglionic autonomic fibers are usually longer than the postganglionic nerve fibers, especially in case of parasympathetic nervous system, where the ganglia are located at the organ. So from the central nervous system to the organ, it's preganglionic and a very short postganglionic. What a perfect, smart design. However, the somatic motor signals to the ordinary contractile skeletal muscle fibers are much faster, are better than those of the autonomic nervous system because of three facts. First fact, they start at the anterior horn cells the anterior horn cells, not the lateral horn cells. They start closer to the exit point in the spinal cord. The second fact, they travel along the fastest nerve fibers, A alpha, thick myelinated, with conduction velocity of 100 meters per second. Not via the B, thin myelinated nerve fibers with conduction velocity 10 meters per second, or C, the unmyelinated with conduction velocity 1 meter per second. The third fact, they go all the way to the skeletal muscle. There is no ganglion in between, as in case of autonomic nervous system. For easy memorizing of the conduction velocity of the three types of nerve fibers A, B, and C, they are 100 meters per second, 10 meters per second, 1 meter per second. So 100 meters for A, 10 meters for B, 1 meter for C fibers. I think this is a very easy way to remember the conduction velocity. A, B, C, 100, 10, 1 meter per second. We come to the third fact. The autonomic efferents secrete two types of chemical transmitters, acetylcholine and noradrenaline. Acetylcholine and noradrenaline, or norepinephrine, but not adrenaline, which is also called epinephrine. Important MSQ fact. Note that the name of adrenaline, which is not secreted by the autonomic nervous system, indicates its site of secretion. Adrenal means adjacent to the kidney. Again, epinephrine means above nephrons. Epi means above. Nephrin, above nephrons. So also it's above the kidney. So the word adrenaline or epinephrine indicates the site of secretion. Don't ever forget, the autonomic nervous system secretes two chemical transmitters, acetylcholine and noradrenaline, not adrenaline or epinephrine. The fourth fact, the autonomic efferents supply two types of effector organs: muscles and glands, smooth and cardiac muscles, exocrine and endocrine glands. So the autonomic efferents supply two types of effector organs: muscles and glands. Each type has got two subtypes: smooth and cardiac muscles, exocrine and endocrine glands. For easy memorizing, the Lach number of autonomic facts is number 2. So the Lach number for the somatic nervous system is number 1. For the autonomic is number 2. Let's try to memorize the 4 facts sharing number 2. The autonomic nervous system is two efferent neuron system. It has got two types of nerve fibers. Can be divided in 2 ways. Structurally, we have preganglionic, B, thin myelinated, conduction velocity 10 meters per second, and C fibers, unmyelinated, conduction velocity 1 meter per second. This is a structural classification. It can be classified functionally into 2 types: sympathetic nerve fibers from the thoracolumbar regions and parasympathetic nerve fibers from the craniosacral region. Notes. We said that the sympathetic is called sympathetic because it reacts in sympathy. Why the parasympathetic is called the parasympathetic? look to the diagram. The parasympathetic nerve fibers in black run parallel to sympathetic nerve fibers on both sides, above and below, parallel to sympathetic. So they are called parasympathetic nervous system. Now, the third fact. The autonomic nervous system secretes two types of chemical transmitters, acetylcholine and noradrenaline or norepinephrine. The fourth and the last fact, the autonomic fibers supply two types of effector organs, muscles and glands. Both has got two subtypes, smooth and cardiac muscles, exocrine and endocrine glands. So, two efferent neuron system, regarding the autonomic, the last number is 2. Two efferent neuron system, two types of nerve fibers, preganglionic and postganglionic, or sympathetic and parasympathetic, two chemical transmitters, acetylcholine and noradrenaline, two effector organs. Each is divided into two subtypes, muscles, smooth and cardiac muscles, glands, exocrine and endocrine glands. Now we come to the autonomic ganglia. Now we come to the autonomic ganglia. By definition, what is the definition of autonomic ganglion? A ganglion, this is the ganglion, is a collection of postganglionic neurons outside the central nervous system. It is a collection of postganglionic outside the central nervous system. MSQ fact. Whereas a nucleus is a collection of preganglionic neurons inside the central nervous system. Important MSQ fact. We come to the second point, the function of autonomic ganglia. What is the function of the autonomic ganglion? Compared to the somatic nervous system, we noticed that the autonomic nervous system has a limited origin, yet it has a wider distribution. Two types of muscles, two types of glands. This problem has been solved by the presence of ganglia. Explanation. Each preganglionic nerve fiber that enters the autonomic ganglion will relay, that is synapses, and activates as many as 9 postganglionic neurons. So autonomic nerve fibers are multiplied by 9 at ganglia in order to be able to cover their wide distribution despite their limited origin. So the problem is that the autonomic nervous system has a limited origin, yet it has a wider distribution. This is solved by multiplying the number of autonomic fibers at the ganglia, because each pre-ganglionic autonomic nerve fiber relaying in a ganglion synapses. Synapse means gets connected and activates 9 postganglionic neurons. In summary, the autonomic ganglia function as distributing center, MSQ fact. Note, the ratio of postganglionic to preganglionic nerve fibers is not the same in case of the sympathetic nervous system as in case of the parasympathetic nervous system. Why? This is because the sympathetic nervous system has a wider distribution compared to that of the parasympathetic nervous system. This is why the ratio of postganglionic to preganglionic in case of sympathetic nervous system is more than in case of the parasympathetic nervous system, simply because the sympathetic nervous system has a wider distribution. 5 main structures, as we already said, are supplied by the sympathetic nervous system and not by the parasympathetic nervous system. Skin, skeletal muscles, ventricle of the heart, spleen, and the adrenal medulla. What a perfect, smart design. Now we come to the types of autonomic ganglia. The sympathetic ganglia are of 2 types. The sympathetic ganglia are of 2 types. Most of the sympathetic ganglia are lateral ganglia, also called paravertebral ganglia, because they are parallel to the vertebral column. They are called paravertebral ganglia. Also called sympathetic chain, because they form chain for the relay of the sympathetic nervous system only. So we call them sympathetic chain. There are 2 ganglia. There are 2 ganglia on each side of every spinal segment. On each side of every spinal segments. But only 3 pairs of cervical ganglia, superior, middle, and inferior, in the cervical region. So in the cervical region, we have 8 cervical segments, yet we have only 3 pairs of cervical ganglia, superior, middle, and inferior. My explanation is, this is because we have less organs in head and neck for the sympathetic nervous system to supply, compared to more organs in the trunk, that is the thorax, the abdomen, and pelvis. So we need more sympathetic nerve fibers for the trunk than for the head and neck. This is, we have less organs in head and neck, so we have less ganglia in the cervical region, superior, middle, and inferior only. Now we have something to say. Each of the sympathetic ganglia is attached to the corresponding spinal nerve by 2 rami. The first, this is the first one, is white ramus, as it contains the preganglionic thin myelinated B fibers. This is why it looks white, because of the white myelin sheath. The myelin sheath is white. So the first ramus contains the preganglionic nerve fibers, which are B thin myelinated nerve fibers, so it looks white. The second is the gray ramus, as it contains the post-ganglionic unmyelinated C fibers. This is why it looks gray, as there is no myelin sheath. So in the sympathetic ganglia, each of the lateral or paravertebral sympathetic ganglion is attached to the spinal nerve by 2 rami. White ramus, because of the preganglionic B thin myelinated fibers, and gray ramus because of the unmyelinated C fibers. Note, the preganglionic sympathetic nerve fibers may travel. I have to show you the drawings. The preganglionic sympathetic nerve fibers may travel through many lateral ganglia, traverse many ganglia, yet it relays in the nearest ganglion to the organ. So the preganglionic may traverse many ganglia, yet it relays in only one ganglion. That's the ganglion nearest to the organ. My explanation is, this is to get the longest possible preganglionic sympathetic nerve fibers, B type of fibers with a high conduction, with a relatively high conduction velocity, 10 meters per second, and to get the shortest possible postganglionic nerve fibers with a lower conduction velocity, 1 meter per second. Again, this is ensured by the fact that we have lateral sympathetic ganglia on both sides of all the spinal segments, on both sides of all spinal segments. Despite the fact that the sympathetic fibers in red color, the sympathetic fibers arise only from the thoracolumbar segments. This ensures the presence of a ganglion very close to the organ to get the longest possible preganglionic and the shortest possible postganglionic. This design of having the ganglia as close as possible to their organs of supply allows autonomic signals to be conducted a long distance in the preganglionic, which is relatively fast fibers. What a perfect smart design. We have a question here. Why we don't have all nerve fibers of the fastest A alpha type in the body? The answer is very simple. Within the perfect size of human beings, which is our size, which is related to the Earth's gravity and the availability of nutrients, if all nerve fibers are of the A alpha type, they wouldn't find enough room in our body to fit in. So we have to manipulate, we have to compromise to have A fibers for the somatic, B and C fibers for the autonomic. We cannot fit all fibers of A type because this is the optimum and the perfect size of our body. Cannot fit all that. This is related to Earth's gravity and to the availability of nutrients. What a perfect smart design. Now we come to the second type of sympathetic ganglia, called the collateral or pre-vertebral ganglia, because it's in front of the vertebral column. These are called the lateral or paravertebral. This is called the collateral or prevertebral ganglia. This is the second type. There are only 3 ganglia at the origin of big vessels arising from the abdominal aorta, and they are named after them. So we have 3 major branches from abdominal aorta: celiac, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric artery. Accordingly, we have 3 collateral ganglia: the celiac ganglia, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric ganglia. These are exclusive for the relay of the sympathetic fibers supplying the gut, the gastrointestinal tract. The preganglionic nerve fibers that supply the gastrointestinal tract leave the ganglia of the sympathetic chain. The preganglionic leave the ganglia of the sympathetic chain and enter the preganglionic nerve fibers that supply the gastrointestinal tract, leave the ganglia of the sympathetic chain and enter these collateral ganglia, where they relay with their postganglionic neuron. The idea of having these collateral ganglia is, my explanation, is the postganglionic axons of the neurons in these ganglia run in the sheath of the vessels supplying the gut and enter the gut with the vessels as one neurovascular bundle to make the least possible number of pores in the wall of gut. This is because the gut contains the digestive secretions. So the presence of less pores, one pore for both the vessels and the nerves, means the presence of less pores, which means less possibility of leakage of these dangerous digestive secretions. What a perfect smart design. So these collateral ganglia with the postganglionic neurons in the sheath of the vessels, allowing the presence of one pore for the nerve and vessels. So we have less pores and less possibility of leakage of the digestive secretions. Now we come to the parasympathetic ganglia. The parasympathetic ganglia are of 2 types. Most of parasympathetic ganglia are terminal ganglia. That is present on or inside the organ. These are the ganglia which supply the trunk. The ganglia, in case of parasympathetic, which supply the trunk, all of them are terminal. Terminal ganglia again ensures, as you can imagine, I have to find the drawings. I think I did one. Oh, this is the one. This is the terminal ganglia. Again, I will say it again. Most of the parasympathetic ganglia are terminal ganglia, that is present in or on or inside the organs. These are the ganglia which supply the trunk. Terminal ganglia again, this design ensures very long preganglionic nerve fibers and very short postganglionic nerve fibers. We explained it before. The preganglionic is B thin myelinated fibers with relatively high conduction velocity, 10 meters per second. So we want it to be as long as possible. This is why the ganglia are terminal. So the distance from the central nervous system to the organ, most of it will be in the preganglionic nerve fibers. And the terminal ganglia allows the postganglionic axons to be very short. This is because the postganglionic are fibers, the postganglionic fibers are C fibers, short fibers with slow conduction velocity, only 1 meter per second. other ganglia that supplies the head and neck. In case of parasympathetic, the ganglia of the trunk, all of them are terminal. In case of head and neck, there are other types of ganglia. We have the celiac ganglion for the eye, the otic and the submandibular ganglia for the salivary glands. We'll discuss it with the function. Note, the adrenal gland is considered a modified sympathetic ganglia. The adrenal gland is considered a modified sympathetic ganglion. During the embryonic life, the postganglionic neuron, the one in black, the postganglionic neurons of adrenal medulla had got two modifications. First, they lost their axons. The axon is lost. Second, their cell bodies are modified into secretory cells, which secrete 80% adrenaline or epinephrine and 20% noradrenaline or norepinephrine. At the end, I would like to remind you that our luck number for autonomic nervous system will always be number 2. So I complete. Remember, the sympathetic nervous system has got two origins, thoracolumbar. This is why it's also sometimes called the thoracolumbar division of the autonomic nervous system. Remember, the sympathetic nervous system relays in two types of ganglia, the lateral or paravertebral and the collateral or prevertebral ganglia. The same is applied for parasympathetic nervous system. It has also, the parasympathetic nervous system has also two origins, craniosacral. This is why it's sometimes called the craniosacral division of the autonomic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system relays in two types of ganglia, the terminal and other ganglia. Thank you, and we will continue our lectures in the near future. Thank you, everybody.